My mom cut me off because I didn't support my sister's golden wedding, so I took the house and left her homeless. My mom is becoming a constant pain and I can't stand it for another second. Her demands grow day by day and I'm at my breaking point. Before I take drastic measures, I want to reality check myself. I don't want to do something I'll regret later. My mom wants me, at 42 years old, to finance my sister Ellie's second wedding at 37. Why? Why did my dad leave me all his inheritance? He also had his reasons for doing so. Why would he give a cent to someone who didn't care to know if he was alive or dead? My mom has always been a self-centered woman who hardly cared about me or my dad. The only person she cared about was Ellie. Mom treated her like she was the center of the universe, fulfilling every one of her wishes and needs. This went beyond typical favoritism. It was a total obsession. It all started because Ellie was born underweight and fragile, but she had the most beautiful and charming face that could melt any heart. My mom overly cared for her, and that never changed. Even after Ellie recovered, grew up, and got married, Mom intervened to solve any minor inconvenience Ellie had, never letting her deal with the consequences or take responsibility for anything. Mom did all of Ellie's homework if she didn't feel like doing it. That's why Ellie didn't finish school, because Mom always protected her. Mom made her so dependent that it wasn't until high school that Ellie started eating on her own. Until then, Mom fed her by hand. Ellie never moved out until she married at 26. Even after that, Mom didn't leave her alone. She called her 4 or 5 times a day, asking what she ate, what she wore for a date, etc. The more attention she received, the more invisible I became. It's not that my mom neglected me completely. She still provided for me when I was a child, but I was always third on the priority list after my sister and herself. My mom prioritized herself more than me and my dad. Her salon sessions were more important than my dentist appointments. She often forgot to pick me up from school because her spa session ran late. The only positive part was my dad. We had a special bond, and he saw what was going on. We had quiet moments together where he'd give me extra allowance or we'd secretly go out for ice cream so I'd feel seen and valued. But Dad was a very hardworking man, so he wasn't home much. When he was, my mom did everything she could to direct his attention to Ellie. Looking back, I realized my mom was raising Ellie to be completely dependent on her, making sure she'd always need her in her life. Like kangaroos who carry their babies in their pouches, which I think are called marsupium. The only difference is that my mom intended to carry an adult baby for a quarter of a century if she could. I left home in high school because I was tired of living in her shadow. I finished college, got a job, and built a life away from home. My dad always made sure to stay in touch, calling or texting constantly, even traveling to visit me when he had time. My mom would occasionally write during holidays or birthdays and would watch my Facebook posts. Everything was fine until everything changed 11 years ago. Dad fell seriously ill. At first, it seemed like a common cold that wouldn't go away. He lived and worked with that condition for months and didn't take it seriously. Mom didn't insist that he get checked either. When the cough became unbearable, he got tests, and they told him he had a severe lung infection. I was working in another city when we found out, and I rushed home immediately. It broke my heart to see him lying alone in his room while Mom and Ellie went out for a manicure. Dad broke down when he saw me. He was in the hospital for a week, and Mom barely visited him for a few minutes each day. Let me tell you, she didn't work and could have kept him company, but she had a full schedule of beauty and fitness appointments. He was discharged 2 days later and assigned a hospital nurse. Literally, Mom didn't have to do anything except spend time with him, and that was too much for her. The day I returned to be with my father, she acted so surprised to see me that she wanted to hug me, but I rejected her. I quietly scolded her for leaving Dad alone at home. She said they had gone grocery shopping. She lied to my face. It was obvious by their appearance that they had just come from a spa session. Ellie was already divorced and living with Mom. Her first marriage barely lasted a year. It's not that Mom didn't care about Dad at all. She did. She wasn't evil, but she was too self-centered. Everyone came second after Ellie and herself. She lived in her own world. She sat with Dad, but she was busy posting stories, doing skin treatments, or chatting with Ellie. She left everything to the nurse and wasn't willing to compromise her daily routine. When I went to visit my father for a week, seeing his condition and my mom's neglect, I couldn't leave him alone. Although I went back to work after a week, I couldn't accept that he needed me. Soon after, I found out his condition was critical. I quit my job immediately, citing a family medical emergency, and returned home. I became his primary caregiver and asked my mother and him to help. The plan was for all of us to come together to support him through his treatment. My mom tried to help, but she wasn't the most reliable person to do it. She would forget to give him his medication on time. If she went to get an oxygen cylinder, she would stop by the beauty salon and return after 4 or 5 hours. By then, I had to go find another one. To her, everything was a temporary inconvenience, like he would recover at any moment. Ellie was hardly around, saying it was too emotionally exhausting for her. She even went on vacation with her friends during one of my dad's worst episodes. I was the one who stayed by my father's side, caring for him and making sure he had company. My mom started worrying more about him when his condition worsened, but it was too late, and he had to go back to the hospital. Watching him deteriorate in that hospital room fueled the silent anger I had been building up for years. I felt that if they had taken him to get checked in time, they might have saved him. When Dad passed away, I was devastated. I left home the day of his funeral and never came back. After his death, his lawyer contacted me to send me his will. In it, my dad left me everything: the house, the savings, his belongings, everything. My mom and Ellie didn't receive anything. I was speechless. I knew he loved me, but I didn't expect him to exclude them entirely. He probably saw how they treated him in his final days, and this was his way of showing me that he noticed everything. Naturally, the will sparked a scandal. My mom and Ellie were furious. My dad's lawyer told me that Ellie literally screamed at the lawyer when the will was revealed, saying it was impossible for her dad to do that. The lawyer shut her down, explaining that my dad had left explicit instructions for everything to go to me. Ellie didn't contest the will but held a grudge. My mom called me to say, "I hope you share the inheritance with us." I blocked her after that conversation. I didn't speak to her for years. I was too exhausted to deal with it. She tried all means to contact me, but I never responded and cut off all communication. I moved back to the city where I worked, found a job, fell in love with a colleague, got married, and moved abroad without my mom knowing anything. 3 years ago, when I had a baby, my mom showed up at my house, apologizing and saying she wanted to be part of my daughter's life. She said, "I've lived with guilt since he passed. I never thought your dad would actually die. If I'd known, I would have spent more time with him." She had stopped grooming herself, saying she no longer cared about those things. Though it also had to do with the fact that salon sessions were expensive and she had lost her ATM card, as she used to call my dad. She shed tears and said she genuinely wanted to be part of my daughter's life and nothing more. I decided to give her a chance. At first, everything seemed fine. She would video call to see my baby and text me to ask how we were doing. But it didn't last long. She started hinting that she was facing financial difficulties, hoping I would send her money, but I didn't. A month ago, I received a call from my mom. She sounded cheerful, almost euphoric, which was unusual. I braced myself, knowing it could only mean one thing: she wanted something. And I was right. She told me Ellie was getting married again and talked about how much this wedding would mean to her after her traumatic first marriage. Then she dropped the bombshell. She expected me to pay for the wedding. First, Ellie and I were not in contact. Second, after my dad's will, she made it clear that she saw me as some sort of villain, the greedy sister who stole the inheritance. Not once had she reached out to check on me or maintain any kind of relationship. My mom was shocked that I refused. "How can you disagree? Didn't you share the inheritance with her? She accepted her fate, but paying for her wedding is something you should have gladly offered, regardless of the inheritance. As the older sister, don't you feel any remorse for your little sister?" I was dumbfounded by her response. What the hell? Mom had never tried to build a bond between us, and suddenly she wants me to take on the role of the older sister? What nonsense. I told her very clearly that I wouldn't pay for the wedding. She was furious, saying it was my responsibility because Dad had left everything to me. She went on about family obligations, how I was hoarding the family fortune, and how Ellie deserved this happiness. I told her I owed nothing to anyone. She started manipulating me, saying, "What options do we have now? Tell me. I've already paid the deposit to book the venue, hire the decorators and the musicians, everything. The invitation has already gone out with the venue location. We can't just cancel now." And that's when I realized something even worse, that she expected me to pay for a party I wasn't even invited to. When I pointed this out, she seemed to realize how wrong it sounded and said I should have been invited. She was silent for a moment and then added, "We thought you'd be busy with the baby. It's a long trip with such a young child, the jet lag and all, and maybe you wouldn't be interested, so we let it go. But we'd be thrilled if you could come. You don't need an invitation to attend your sister's wedding, right? Come. It'll be fun for all of us to reunite again." I cut her off immediately. "I don't need empty words. I know your true faces." She begged me to save her reputation since the invitations had already been sent out. I hung up, saying I wouldn't give them a single cent of my dad's inheritance. I thought she'd back off, but no. She kept harassing me with manipulative messages and voice notes. She even went as far as to say that if I didn't comply, it might be better if she cut ties with me and pretended she only had one daughter. Look, I don't mind not having her in my life, I really don't, but her persistence has pushed me over the edge. I want her to pay for her audacity. I let her live in the house despite what she did to my dad. I think it's time she reaped what she sowed. I want to send her an eviction notice, but I'm hesitant. My husband says I should be ready to face public judgment if I go through with it. Evicting your mother from the house she's lived in for 45 years isn't viewed kindly in our society. Not everyone will bother to know the details, but they'll be quick to judge and call me cruel. So, what do you think? Is it too harsh to leave her homeless? Update 1. Many of you asked why I let them live in the house for 10 years. Honestly, I wasn't ready to deal with the drama after my dad died. I was emotionally shattered and had so much to sort through. I was a single 32-year-old woman without a job or direction, having just witnessed the loss of the most important person in my life. So I left everything as it was and rushed to regain control of my life. During that process, I got the chance to settle abroad and never looked back. Now I feel the time is right to close loose ends. So, I evicted her. She left me no other choice. She made my life miserable with her emails after I blocked her everywhere. She went as far as to say that if I didn't pay for Ellie's wedding, she'd disown me and say I was dead to her. Ellie joined in and called me every name in the book. According to them, I had tactically positioned myself with my dad to manipulate him emotionally. The accusation was absurd. I cared for my dad because I loved him, not because I wanted all the inheritance. I couldn't take it anymore. I spent years swallowing my anger, watching them take advantage of my dad and ignore me. So I decided it was time to take back what was mine. I sent her an eviction notice for the house. My mom lost it after that. I guess she wasn't expecting me to actually do it, but yes, I did. Her initial reaction was disbelief. Then she said, "No one can evict me from my husband's house. I've lived here for 45 years. How dare you even think I'd leave so easily?" I replied, "Where were you when your husband needed you the most? Busy getting your nails done. You should ask the nail salon to let you live there then." I told her she could do whatever she wanted, but I wasn't backing down from my decision. When she saw I was serious, she softened and spoke of her vulnerability. She said, "Where will I go at my age? How will I support myself? I've been surviving on the pension and renting out half of the house. If you evict me, where will I go?" I replied, "That's not my problem. Ask your golden daughter to take care of you." I told her she had 30 days to vacate, and whatever she did after that was none of my business. My mom realized she'd made a mistake cornering me to finance Ellie's wedding, so she quickly retracted her demands and said, "If you don't want to pay for the wedding, that's fine. We'll manage on our own. But please don't evict me. Withdraw the notice." I said, "I'm not paying for the wedding, and I'm not withdrawing the notice. I'm taking back everything that's mine. I let you live there for 10 years, and instead of appreciating it, you insult and manipulate me for money. You never cared about me. Why should I care about you now? You spent your whole life pampering your golden daughter. Why are you begging me now? Isn't your one and only daughter capable of taking care of you?" Apparently, my words hurt Ellie's ego, and she told my mom to vacate the house as soon as possible and move in with her. She's been bragging to everyone about how she'll take care of her mother and doesn't need my favor. Mom vacated the house on day 26. I hired an agency to renovate it and put it up for rent. It's only been a week since then. Ellie moved her wedding from a garden near a town hall with a lake, which has caused a stir in the family and relatives group chat. I haven't heard from her or anyone else since then, and honestly, I don't care. Update 2. I have news. My mom has been living with Ellie since the eviction, but the family drama didn't stop there. Recently, I found out that Ellie's husband wasn't exactly thrilled about having his mother-in-law as a permanent guest. He was fed up with my mom being, well, my mom. He was already upset that Ellie wasted so much money on the venue reservation and other wedding-related expenses. Apparently, he never wanted a big wedding, but Ellie convinced him, saying she'd get me to pay for most of it. When that didn't happen, they had to cancel everything. Switching venues and resending invitations was embarrassing for him and his family. Then, on top of that, Ellie moved her meddling mother in with them. Who would want that? I heard through a nosy relative that Ellie's husband gave her an ultimatum, either get rid of her mom or he'd consider separating. After hearing this, I was pretty sure my mom would try to reach out to me. Weeks went by, and sure enough, my mom contacted me again, claiming she had nowhere to go. She cried, saying she'd have to stay at a shelter if I didn't do the right thing and let her move back into the house. She tried playing the pity card, saying she was just an old woman with no one else. I told her I was sorry for her situation, but the house was no longer available. It had been rented out to a friend's brother, and he had already moved in. She screamed over the phone, accusing me of abandoning her and saying, "Blood is thicker than water." Finally, I said what I had wanted to say for years. Maybe if you and Ellie had treated Dad with a shred of respect, you wouldn't be in this mess. Who knows, maybe Dad would still be alive if you'd cared about him. You ignored him so much that the man began ignoring himself, and his health deteriorated. To escape the toxicity of his wife, he buried himself in work and never took care of himself. I hung up the phone and cried for hours. I don't know why, but that day I missed my dad so much. Some relatives reached out saying they couldn't believe I'd leave my own mother homeless. They urged me to forgive her and let her have the house back. I stood my ground and cut off contact with anyone who tried to guilt-trip me. I know these relatives didn't witness firsthand how my mom treated my dad in his final years, which is why they see me as the irrational one now. But after everything they did to me, I was no longer willing to be their safety net. My mom ended up moving temporarily with a distant relative, but her welcome there is wearing thin. I heard she's planning to manipulate another relative into taking her in, but by now, she's burned so many bridges that she doesn't have many options left. Some people may think I went too far, but I don't care. The house, my inheritance, and my peace of mind were all earned through years of loyalty and love for my father, who saw me and valued me. I'll cherish that memory and finally move on, guilt-free, knowing I did what was best for me. If he didn't trust them with his money, why would I betray him by giving them a single cent of mine? They don't deserve it, do they? If my dad didn't want them to have his money, I can't betray his wishes and give it to them. Update 3. I'd like to say what happened to my sister isn't my fault, but I'd be lying. Though it's not entirely my fault. I'll explain what happened, and you can decide what you think. After some relatives called me cruel for leaving my mom homeless, without knowing the full story, I made a public post explaining my side. This turned out better than I expected because I barely received any more messages defending my mom, except for one person who said I should help her anyway. You can't please everyone, I suppose. Some people will always be as narcissistic as my mom and sister. But here's where my sister's problems began. Instead of the family turning against me with pitchforks like I was Frankenstein and they were the angry mob, they turned on my mom and sister. And maybe my brother-in-law didn't know this story, but he has now decided to leave Ellie. I don't think anyone can blame the man, considering that if he got to know my mom better when she moved in, he likely envisioned a bleak future with my sister, a future he didn't want. He must be afraid that Ellie will abandon him, just like my mom did to my dad during his illness. So now, there's no wedding. And since the house belonged to her fiancé, she's had to leave. Now I've left two people homeless, one directly and one indirectly. Ellie is currently living with my mom at the house of the relative my mom moved in with. Unsurprisingly, this is the same relative who urged me to forgive my mom and let her move back in. It's pretty hypocritical, considering they just want my mom and Ellie out of their house. Still, even if some people think I'm the bad guy for leaving them on the street, my heart won't soften. Being left without a roof and a penny is the least those two manipulators deserve. Update 4. Now, my mom and sister are literally on the street after being kicked out by the relative who took them in. Here's a summary. My mom wasn't happy with her new living situation, especially since she had to share a room and bed with my sister. The relative wasn't making things easy for them either, encouraging them to find jobs and get back on their feet. At first, they were gentle suggestions, but my mom had other plans. She wanted to go to the house where my friend's brother now lives and demand he let them stay there. The worst part? She wanted to stay for free at first, claiming it was still her house, but the brother didn't know them and refused. He was paying rent and had every right to decide who stayed there. My mom then offered him something like $100 a month, which doesn't even cover a fraction of the rent. He declined and asked her to leave, but she broke some small garden ornaments I'd bought for the house. He called the police. My mom had already left, but when I heard about it, I told them where she was staying. The police showed up to question her after finding out where she was. This was the last straw for the relative, who told them they needed to leave. My mom begged for a few more weeks, but the relative stood firm and told them to go immediately. The funniest part is that I know all these details because this relative has been complaining to someone who told me I should send them a message saying they should forgive my mom and sister and not leave them without a roof. I doubt they'd like receiving a message like that after what they've been through with them. Now, my mom and sister have been staying in a homeless shelter for the past few days. I'm not mocking homeless people. I've helped homeless people in my new country. But if anyone deserves a reality check, it's those two. At least now they'll learn life isn't just about going to beauty salons. There's something called work. My mom isn't as old as she tries to seem. She's in her mid-60s. My sister, on the other hand, is a healthy young woman who can work. They could get back on their feet if they moved their lazy butts and got their mess in order. Update 5. I don't feel bad, as none of our relatives have tried to help my mom and sister. Even they've seen how awful they are and how much they deserve what's happening to them, especially since they haven't been able to get their act together. Gone are the days of beauty salons and peace because, from what I've heard, they look very run down. They still don't have a proper home, although technically they're getting government assistance. They're in government housing meant to help people in their situation get back on their feet. But even with that help, they haven't managed to find jobs. I doubt they've even tried. I'm sharing this update because people have been asking if they've tried to come back to my house or to live with another relative. The answer is no to everything. This is all I know about what they've been up to lately.